Hey guys, so today we're going to make a Rage Against the Machine style track and it's going to sound like this. So that's what we're going to make, and it's very much a Renegades inspired sound. For me, that's kind of when this band hit their peak, at least production wise. Rage don't get enough credit for just how heavy they are. Like, they might not be grindcore or whatever, but the actual tones themselves are so heavy, especially for music from like 25, 30 years ago. So today we're going to look into how the hell they got that insane bass tone, how to get the iconic Tom Morello guitar tones that are super different from what everyone else in heavy music uses. And of course, we're going to replicate that super heavy hip hop influenced drum sound. So let's start with an intro, and I want to kind of tease the guitar riff, like a more chill version of the heavy riff you just heard. So we're going for 93 beats per minute, kind of slow, bouncy, a little bit new metal vibes. Tuning wise, Rage is mostly standard or D, so I'm in drop D, and I'll break down the tones in a minute, but let's just start by laying something down. Alright, and on its own that sounds a little bit basic, so let's lay down another idea with some cool effects. Everyone knows Tom Morello loves his effects, and one of his signatures is kind of this delay sound. So we have here a super fast delay with a lot of feedback. That's the main part of this sound, but I'll probably break it all down in a minute. And this is one of Tom's many tricks, like in the song Cochise, however you say it. The intro, like super fast delay, a lot of feedback, kind of that helicopter kind of sound. So we're not doing anything melodic with this, we'll just add a texture on it. Alright, and let's just add one more guitar effects track for the intro. I want to do a wah this time, and again I'll break down the sound properly in a minute because these are all the same tone, so we have like the same amp with a delay on it for the previous one. Same thing again with a wah on it, so it'll all make sense soon, but before breaking it all down, let's just... For this, I want to basically, I want like to automate a wah pedal like this. Tom, of course, would be using a real pedal with his foot, but I don't have one, and this is effectively the same thing. So again, we're not going to go crazy melodically. We'll just lay down like a couple of notes just to get the effect. It's a very signature Tom sound to have a wah in there, so we just need like the sound of it. So we're just kind of layering the effects up in this intro to kind of tell your ear, this is Rage, this has like the crazy effects. Because, you know, not a lot of bands go as wild with effects as Tom. Like, he doesn't really show off with the notes and solos and stuff he plays, but he definitely does with the effects and the sounds. I mean, Rage in general tends to be quite simple notes and rhythms, but very complex effects, production, tones. But it's all just about that energy, all about that bounce. So in that vein, we're going to lay down some very simple drums in the intro, and we're going to use a few different drum kits for this track, but we're starting with just the Get Good Drums metal kit, and we'll just program in some kicks. So honestly, all we need for a Rage intro is a nice consistent kick. Let's even turn it down a bit. And let's just add a bit of variation on the last bar. Let's just kind of build the tension. And we'll echo that on the cymbals, again with Get Good Drums. I'll properly break down all these sounds in a minute, but right now let's just... There we go, just mirror the kick. Alright, 2 finishing touches for this intro before we get heavy. Let's quickly lay down some bass guitar. And again, the whole intention with this intro is keeping it basic, keeping it simple. You don't want to give the listener everything. I'm just going to play one note. I basically just want to tell the listener, if you want a Rage song, you're going to have to wait. So get through the intro. And let's do the same thing. So you can probably see here how everything's working together, coming together for the end of that intro so that you're like, give it to me, give me the riff. And that's what we're going to do. Let's add one last touch for the intro. I'm just going to take our main guitar tone that we'll break down in a second and... Gotta give it the Tom Morello slide. Okay, so now we're ready to get heavy, but before I track a riff, let's just talk about the tone. So you're probably expecting that I'm going to be using the neural Tom Morello amp because that would make complete sense. I did try the Tom Morello amp and it sounded awesome to me, but I also tried the Morgan Amp Suite by Neural DSP. This is an AC30 amp, not an amp Tom even uses, but to me this just sounded a little bit closer. And even though he doesn't use AC30s, if you know AC30s, you know that that kind of single coil pickup into a boosted AC30 tone That is very close to the classic Rage sound. So yeah, you could definitely use the Tom Morello amp. I'm not sponsored by Neural or anything. I just love their product. So I do recommend that amp, but today I'm going to be using this AC30 because I just thought it sounded sick. The Morello amp is a bit more metal. This for me just has a bit more of that like, that kind of 60s, 70s, like super spanky rock sound, which I really like. So let's just break down this tone, and circling back, all of those intro tones were this same amp, same tone, but with a wah on it for the wah track, with a delay on it for the delay track. So that's why I didn't break those tones down at the time, because it's just this tone that we're about to break down now, but with an effect added. So this main tone, we have it on the left and right, same thing. And the first step is the single coil pickups. You can get this kind of tone with humbuckers, but if you want more of that bright, spanky kind of sound, single coils really go a long way. So after the pickups, the first step is very simple. Just loaded up the amp and that is it. Stock settings, and it sounds like this. So obviously that sounds miles from what we want, but it's a good base to work from. There is a Rage tone in there. We just need to do a few things to bring that Rage tone out. And how we're going to do it is by boosting and boosting and boosting in front of the amp. This is what I love about AC30s. You can just drive them so hard with pedals and they just sound amazing. So before the signal from my guitar gets to the amp, we have these two preamps, which are basically there to prepare the signal and give it a bit more life before it hits the amp. So let me play with these turned off and then I'll turn them on and you'll hear how this just boosts everything and really makes the tone feel alive. You hear how that's becoming a Rage tone now? Like it's still not 100% there, but it's getting a bit of that grit. We really want to preserve the cleanness because Rage tones aren't overly saturated, but we want some harshness. We want some grit. We just don't want to overly saturate it. So that's why I'm kind of going in with a cleaner tone and then boosting it rather than starting with like a super hard driven metal amp and losing all the clarity that we want. All right, so after those preamps, the way that we're turning it into a full-on heavy Rage tone is with this, a plugin by Audiority, which is a replica of the Horizon Devices Precision Drive. This is a free plugin and I would pay good money for this thing, so I can't recommend it enough. This is a great distortion pedal and I can't believe there's a free version of it that sounds this good. This pedal is technically used for like metalcore and gent most of the time, but it has the characteristics that we need for this tone. Super clean, tight distortion, beautifully shapes the low end and tidies it up. And that's exactly what we need. We need this tone to not be blown out. We need it to be nice and tight and clean, but heavy. So listen to what a difference this makes. Now the tone has everything we need. We've still got that spanky quality, which is very much a Rage thing, but it's super distorted, super aggressive without losing all that clarity. However, like I said, Rage is simple with the notes and rhythms, complex with the production and the effects. So there is a little more to this. That's definitely the main tone. That is the iconic Rage sound that we need, but I'm layering this with a second tone. And the second one sounds like this. So this tone kind of throws everything out the window that I just said about retaining clarity, but this isn't something we want you to notice as much. The main tone, that's the iconic Rage sound. That's what we want the listener to hear and go, yep, this is Rage. This is kind of meant to just blend with it and give it a bit more energy. And Rage sometimes do get a bit more distorted, and when they do, it's often a more fuzzy tone rather than like a thrash tone or whatever. So my thinking is that by blending the two, we get that old school kind of vintage sound of Rage, and then we also get the super heavy distorted sound all together. And this second tone, we're going to start by pitching it down an octave. Pitch shifting is another of Tom Morello's signature kind of things. He pitches up, he pitches down. If you listen to this, I'm not going to pitch it all the way down so it's like a bass guitar. I'm just blending in a bit of low octaves. So this would be if it was all the way up. But we're going to put it all the way down here. So you're mostly getting the original signal, but you're just kind of getting that low pitch shifted sound in there. Let me turn that off and on and you'll hear how there's a low octave in there, but it's not taken away from the original signal. It's just beefing it up, giving us more low end, and Rage is all about the heavy low end. So after the pitch shifter, we're running it into a tube screamer with this kind of fuzzy TS7 pedal, and into, once again, a neural amp. This is the 14 amp, which if you watch the channel, you have seen me use this a million times. Can't go wrong with that amp. It's just a solid, heavy sound. So other than the pitch shifting, that second tone is kind of just a more basic metal tone to layer with the main one and just give it a bit more balls, a bit more energy. So let's go ahead and track our main riff now. So we're going to get a little funky with some pull-offs. We're going to have some syncopation, quite a lot of syncopation to just really make it groove. But yeah, I'm really keeping in mind there is no fluff, there's no showing off in Rage. It's about getting you moving, it's about getting that energy. So let's lay down our riff. All right, that's the left, so we're gonna have these two amps working together, just double tracking, and yeah, as far as notes I'm playing, pretty much just keeping it minor pentatonic, other than at the end we have that passing note. So that note's not in key. And that is another very Rage thing. They love passing notes that are not in key. They love flat fifths. Anything that kind of breaks the rules without sounding like ridiculous. So yeah, got to throw a little passing note in there for Rage. It's a very Sabbath thing. I feel like Rage Against the Machine is basically if Black Sabbath riffs were hip hop. Does that make sense to everyone, or am I crazy? Let me know below. Is that not the perfect description of Rage Against the Machine? Also, if you're enjoying this video, please hit the like and consider subscribing if you want to see more content like this. All right, now let's lay down some super heavy drums and then we get to that iconic bass tone, one of my favorite bass tones of all time. So let's program in a beat, and the drums should not be overlooked, especially on Renegades. For a 25-year-old album, the sounds on that are still mind-blowing. I do not know how they achieved those sounds in like 2000. All right, so for the drums, like I keep saying, everything in Rage is about the energy, no showing off. We're just going to try to emphasize the accents in the guitar riff so it's heavier. Bum 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 bum. Bum 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 bum. So a lot of syncopation. You see this? There's the beat, there's our note. There's the beat, there's our note. There's the beat, there's our note. Let's try that. You hear how that works? Just got to emphasize that bounce in the riff, and then it's going to slap so hard when we hit a snare on it. But before the snare, let's lay down some cymbals and do the exact same thing. We're just going to emphasize everything that bounces in the guitar riff. So start with some crashes. Turn them up a bit. And then bang, bang. Oh, we are so ready for a snare now. This is going to bounce so hard. All right, before we put down the snare, let me just break down these sounds, because these are still Get Good drums. So the kick, still Get Good drums metal kit, and the cymbals, same thing. All right, so to break down this kick sound, this is one of the most important parts of the Rage sound. And again, especially on Renegades, especially early Audio Slave, the kick is everything. So the Get Good drums kick raw sounds like this, but we're going to turn it into this. Super clean, super low, super tight, super aggressive. So the first thing we're going to do to get that sound is let's bring in a transient shaper, and we're just going to pull down the release completely. We don't need any of that tail. It's not a nice wholesome kick sound. It's not spacious. It's not warm. It's just a punch right in the face. So the original kick has the slap and then has this tail if you listen. It's kind of like pow, pow. Now we're just going to make it go. Completely cutting it off. We just want a slap. And then we're going to make it a little more dirty, a little more punchy with Decapitator, just saturate it a bunch. So let's do that. That's just helping it to jump out at you a little more. We really need this kick to jump out the speakers. The only issue after pushing it with Decapitator is that I'm now hearing some resonant frequencies I don't like. It's a bit too like pap, pap. It needs to be more duh, duh. So let's just try some EQ moves and see if we can remove that a bit. So these two frequencies were a bit more slappy, and then there was a bit of like woof, woof, which we didn't need in this one. So just a nice sharp slap now. All All right, now that we've cleaned that up, we just need a way bigger low end in the kick. The Rage Against the Machine kick is massive. It's more like a hip hop kick in some ways than a metal kick. So I'm going to use the two plugins I always use when I want more bass, and that's the R bass enhancer. Let's boost. Yeah, maybe there, 100 hertz. And the Pultec EQ. The reason I love these two plugins is because they both are great at adding more bass without muddying things up, which can be a very difficult balance to achieve. So yeah, we'll just go for 72 hertz, 3 dB. So if you listen without those bass boosts and then with, you'll hear what a difference it makes if you're listening with headphones. And at the end, let's just add one more transient shaper just because we're squeezing it with Decapitator, which is giving it a bit more of a tail again. So let's clean that up. There you go. We've turned a nice warm, spacious kick into a brutal punch in the face. And that is the Renegade's kick. And like I said, it's a huge, huge part of the Rage sound, not just on its own, but you'll see when we get to the bass guitar that the kick is a very important part of the bass sound even. They really lock in together. And without getting those two sounds right, you don't really get that Rage vibe. All right, the cymbals, thankfully, we don't have to do anywhere near as much. It's a very natural cymbal sound in Rage. So we've got a tiny bit of top end boost from Fresh Air, adding a little bit of grit with a soft clipper, and just a tiny bit of reverb with the UJAM reverb. You could just leave it dry. Like these cymbals, they sound great either way, so thankfully that's not too much work. All right, but now for the snare, and this Get Good Drum snare, it's great. But to me, that is just not the Rage sound, so rather than trying to sculpt that into the Rage sound, I tried something else. And we're gonna actually layer two snares here. The second one's gonna be a surprise. The first one is just gonna be this UJAM Brute kit. And this snare sound, that's more like what we want. It's kind of a bit gritty, a bit rough around the edges, and that is Rage. But it still isn't 100% there for me. So the surprise is that I'm going to layer it with this St. Anger snare sample. Someone sent me this recently and I can't remember who, but whoever it was, thank you, because I have been using this in like every mix. Obviously for Rage Against the Machine, we don't want the full on boom St. Anger sound, but just layering a bit in there means that our snare is a bit more explosive. It's ringing out a bit more. It's a bit more nasty. And that's what we need. Like this is just a bit too dry. Sounds a little silly on its own, but in the mix, big explosive snare, and that's what we want. Okay, the last drum we're gonna add, and then we're onto the bass guitar, is this Ghost Hat kick, which you have probably seen me use in everything recently because I love it. Any kind of hard digital kick would work for this. And this is another one of those things that you don't want to stand out. You don't want the listener to notice it. You just want them to feel it. It's little tricks like this that give you that impression that the song is just jumping out the speakers at you. So we're going to be very sparing with this kick because it is a very, very obnoxiously loud sound. But we're just going to accent the moments where we want it to slap a little harder and distorting this with Decapitator just like a lot of the other sounds. So listen to our drums without this kick and then with it, and you'll hear how it's just suddenly jumping out the speakers without sounding like radically different. Alright, so that's our drums and guitars done, time for the bass. And Tim's bass tone is very much like a Geddy Lee from Rush Tone, Primus, Flea from Red Hot Chili Peppers. The kind of hard-driven high mids, playing with your fingers really hard kind of tone. And this is my favorite type of bass tone because as much as I love like the modern metal tones, we've kind of got it to a point where they're so compressed, so consistent, so distorted. It's like it sounds heavy in a mix, but on its own, it's just so flat and boring. This tone, you can still hear all the energy in it. You can hear the guy like pulling on those strings. So I really love like the aggression in this kind of tone. The magic in this tone is really in the high mids and using the right type of distortion. I was talking a minute ago about how the kick drum and the bass guitar are really going to work together. Well, something that always blew my mind about Rage's tone was that it feels so bassy, and I would try and get the same tone and I'd just be turning up the bass, turning up the low end, and it'd just get muddy. And I'm like, how am I getting this so wrong? And what I eventually figured out is that it's the kick and the bass working together. The kick is so heavy in the low end, and then the bass guitar is so full and rich in the mid-range that they just lock in together and feel like this big bassy thing all working together, because the bass guitar sound in Rage is kind of percussive. It's not like Korn, but it's got that like aggression to it. So they really lock in together and create this monstrous sound that just feels like more low end than a mix can handle. So something that might surprise you is that this bass tone isn't actually as full of low end as you might be expecting, because the kick is handling most of that. This is more about the mid-range. Like, for sure, there is a lot of low end, but there's way more mid-range than you usually get in a bass tone. So let's get into the tone, and stay with me. There's going to be 3 amps, but it's going to make sense. So the first one is going to be all about the high mids. This one is me trying to get the Geddy Lee Flea Primus kind of sound. So you can see immediately off the bat, I'm cutting a bunch of low end, boosting around 1,000, what is it, 700, 800 hertz. That frequency in the bass guitar is so important for the Rage sound, a huge part of the Rage sound. So we're then using the Dark Glass Ultra and just slightly driving it, slightly EQing it. You can see I've got the high mids all the way up, quite a lot of bass, but not a lot of low mids, because we don't want it to get muddy with all this mid-range. So just a lot of high mids and a bit of distortion into a Cubase amp. Usually I don't use the stock Cubase amps, but this one sounded great. I don't even know what it's modeled on. It just sounds great. So I'm doing a little bit of multiband compression, just compressing it, stock settings, I think. And then this is like a tape machine. It's just kind of an overdrive. I didn't want like a saturated kind of overdrive. I wanted just to push it a little harder, compress it a little more. So that's what we're using the Magneto for. And then a bit of gain, quite a lot of gain, but you can hear it's not breaking up too much. It's just getting pushed to distortion. And after that, once again, I'm just cutting some lows, boosting a bit of that mid-range that we want. So it's got even more of that kind of nasal high mid sound. That was cool. Just like with the guitar, the approach with the bass is kind of the same. We're pushing it and pushing it and pushing it, boosting it and boosting it, but trying not to lose that clarity, so you can still hear my fingers like pulling on the strings. Like we're distorting it to the point that it's super aggressive, but not going over the top. All right, so the next tone, I don't know if Tim uses multiple amps, but I basically duplicated that tone and changed it out for the Mark bass amp. This is a little less mid-rangey. It still is mid-rangey, but it's got a little more of like the low end and the high end that I want. So if you listen to the first tone, you'll hear how it's just high mids. This one's a little more scooped and a little more crisp on the top, powerful on the bottom. So we're kind of just thickening the main tone out with this second one. So here's the first one with the high mids. And then here's the second with more of the highs and lows. So all the same settings, except I'm using the Mark bass amp. And then I've got this Quadrafuzz stock Cubase plugin, which is a multi-band fuzz. I only just discovered this thing, but how cool is that? So yeah, you can see I'm just adding a bit of grit in every band. All right, then our third tone is going to be a departure. So those first two, like I said, are retaining the clarity. We then kind of, again, have this similar trick to what we did with the guitars, where we have the main tone that's kind of broken up, a bit distorted, and then we have that super heavy distorted tone. We're going to do the same kind of thing. So we have this prepare. So this one, again, is a duplicate of that first tone. Same dark glass pedal, same Cubase amp, same EQs and stuff. But you can see I've got a lot more drive going on. And then also we have the Quadrafuzz again, but it is whacked right up, super distorted. So that's just blowing out our bass tone. And again, I'm thinking Renegades. You can hear his fingers like pulling on those strings, but you can also hear so much distortion. So I don't know if Tim uses multiple amps, but I think he must do. He's definitely doing something complex to get his tone, because it is a multifaceted tone. All right, let's lay down our bass part and then we'll quickly cover some other stuff. All right, just before we call this finished and I show you the whole track, let me quickly lay down a verse. So I'm going to program in like a more funky beat. We'll chill out a little more. So maybe turn down the kicks a little more and just get more funky. We'll not use the St. Anger snare as well. We don't need it to like absolutely bang. We just need it to be a little more groovy in the verse. Let's even throw the beat off a little. So let's put it there instead of here. Keeps it super groovy. All right, and going with that theme, let's chill out the bass a bit. We'll just use this high mid bass tone. We don't need it to be all encompassing and brutal. And let's just get a little funkier with the rhythms too. Note here how we're still letting the kick and bass do their own thing together. I'm going to let the guitar do like a counterpoint on its own. And again, we'll just go with the kind of more chill tone rather than having the full. And we're still just throwing a little bit of dissonance in there. And on the bass, just that minor sixth to kind of throw off the pentatonic vibe a little bit. All right, last thing for this verse, let's just take that wah thing. Remember this guy from the intro? Let's just put the same thing in the verse so there's a bit of a texture there, a bit more of that kind of Tom Morello effects thing to give you the signature Rage sound. All right, and that is pretty much every Rage Against the Machine sound broken down for you guys, at least all the important parts. Of course, there's more to the song. There's a cool little guitar solo that's got like a Tom Morello vibe. There's a heavy bridge to listen out for, so definitely check out the final mix when I show it you in a second. But that should be everything you need to know to get the Rage sound. Just to quickly touch on the solo, because I don't want to skip over anything. The only difference I did with the main tone is just in the Morgan amp suite, there's a transpose thing, so I just pitched it up 12 semitones. And you'll hear it really gives it the Tom Morello sound. He loves pitching his guitars up an octave, giving it that like digital, weird, manipulated sound. So listen out for the solo. I didn't want to skip over that because it's another important little Rage trick. All right, so I'm going to stop talking and show you the final mix. Thank you guys so much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what else you want to see on the channel. Rage Against the Machine. Let's go.